Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's Coming in Hot with Abby Baird. For those of y'all who have never been here, and as you continue to join and enter, welcome. I'm so happy you're here. This show is all about the next generation of business and the supply chain and our evolving industry and what that looks like for each generation, how the differences, the similarities, and everything in between. So as y'all come in, please let us know where you're tuning in from and just any questions you have. And we're going to ask that throughout the whole entire show, just for y'all to let us know where you're tuning in from, what your thoughts are, questions you have. But today is going to be a really special show. I'm super excited about it, and I've been looking forward to it. And I think it's one that our audience will really be able to relate to, all about returning back to the office, but what that's actually like specifically for my generation or younger generations, but also the differences between the generations and maybe the impact of working at home and how it's going to be different before versus after. And so I have someone very dear to me joining. So welcome to the stage, Jillian Hatfield.
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
I am good. I am coming in hot. I'm so excited to be here.
You are coming in hot. You are. Well, tell the audience a little bit about yourself. You and I, we've crossed paths. We're here, but tell the audience all about you.
Yes, of course. So hello, everybody. My name is Jillian. I am currently working as a category sales analyst. So not quite in supply chain, but definitely have some interactions there. I'm an industrial engineer by education. So I'm a 2020 pandemic grad. Since then, I've been able to practice logistics engineering as well as category management, which is where I'm at today. Fun facts about me is that I really love concerts, and my next one up is Harry Styles. I'm really excited to see Harry. In terms of my passions within the workplace and kind of what drives me, I am super passionate about diversity and inclusion, continuous learning, continuous improvement, as well as servant leadership. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Amazing. So good. Well, it is so good to have you. And just the way you speak about your experience, boss woman. Wow. I'm so excited that because obviously I'm a supply chain gal through and through, but it's so interesting to have your perspective and have diverse thought on here about coming from an engineering background or a logistics background, and what that looks like at different places. But let's just get started. There's just too much. There's so much. And so the reason I wanted you on the show is because a couple months ago, you and I listened to this podcast, and I think we're gonna put it in the comments on the screen so y'all can access it. And it's a Brene Brown podcast, and it's called The Great Awkward. And Jillian and I listened to this podcast, and immediately life change. It was just so good. So let's kind of explain to our audience, and I really encourage everyone to listen to the podcast, obviously, but what is the Great Awkward? Like, how would you describe it? What's it like? Let us know. And I can give my thoughts as well.
Yeah. Excited to hear your thoughts too. So when you introduced me to this podcast, I was like, this is what everyone's kind of been feeling since, we kind of decided that maybe full on work from home wasn't going to work for some organizations, and we started coming back into the office. So to me, the Great Awkward is the strangeness that we are all feeling after this time period where we were working in isolation. And now we are starting to transition back into at least hybrid models in a lot of different organizations. I know some organizations are kind of like full on 5 days a week type deal. And there's a lot of weirdness with that because we've forgotten how we interact with each other in previous times. And the way that we interact with each other in the office, in my opinion, won't ever necessarily be the same again. And so Brene's podcast sort of summarizes the different scenarios that folks are going through as they're returning to the office. And, I know you and I have talked a lot about this podcast, so more excited to get into it.
Yeah, I think, and that's why I feel like the great awkward just kind of like like the concept of that, it makes so much sense. And it just snowballed so many different ideas for us about, especially as young professionals, like what our workplace is going to look like. And the way you described it is just too good. And I mean, I would have to describe it in the same way. It's how returning back to the office and back to this in-person space is uncomfortable and it's new and we don't know how to react to it. And so therefore we have to embrace this awkwardness. The concept of whenever I meet someone new at the office, do I shake their hand? Do I like do I get close to do I maintain 6 feet? Just even those small moments of awkwardness, we have to embrace them. And simultaneously, like, do I just walk up to someone's desk? Do I have to skip like those moments in the office that none of us really considered? And as someone who just graduated in May, all my work experience has been virtual, like fully just virtual. And so now being in office, I'm having to learn this while I think, and you've experienced the impact of the pandemic as well, but people who their young career was not affected by the pandemic, they got to learn about office mannerisms, office etiquette in their internships and prepared them for that. So even like those moments, we just have to embrace the awkwardness. And what are there ways like you have experienced? I know I just kind of listed some examples, but like how have like what, and this can be virtually or in person, but like what are some ways you've experienced like the great awkward, whether that be a really small moment, a big moment, the in between, like have you felt it?
Yeah. So, I mean, over the past several years, like you said, I mean, my workplace, interactions have evolved a lot because I graduated college in my living room, in my parents' living room, because my graduation ceremony got canceled in May 2020. And then I started my first full-time job, in my second bedroom of my apartment. And it was a really surreal feeling to be executing engineering work from home. Now, that said, I started transitioning back into an office setting around January 2021. So I was home for about 8 months. And that's a long time to develop your own work habits and kind of get into the groove of things. And so going back was really strange because there were basic things that I didn't even know, like where the bathroom was. I didn't know like where the kitchen was, like weird things like that that you don't think about if you were just coming into a company in a normal setting. So one of the kind of main things for me that I've experienced continually is the handshake thing. I do not think that we as a society should return to that, but we are. That's the way it is. We're in business and people in real life also shake hands as well. In like a social environment, it's a social norm that I'm kind of surprised has come back in the way that it has. And so that said, when someone like reaches their hand out to me, if it's their first time meeting me or if they haven't seen me in a while, whatever, do I necessarily want to shake back? Not really, but I don't want to make that other person feel bad for initiating that gesture, which, doesn't have any ill intent. So kind of my way around that is I kind of try to get ahead of the curve. If someone new is coming up to me, whatever, I kind of just give a little wave. That's kind of my way around. I'll just be like, hi, because that way I'm kind of trying to signify that where my boundaries are without, explicitly hurting someone's feelings or making them feel uncomfortable. But that's it. That whole entire experience is just awkward. And then secondary, and this is true for just hybrid models everywhere, there's always been an experience where one person is like one or two people are like calling in and then the rest of the room is like full of people. And so I've been on both ends of that situation over the past several years. And it can certainly be a weird feeling to be the only person who is calling in from home and then everybody else is in the room having, maybe sidebar conversations or, afterwards they're debriefing the meeting, but you have to, kind of log off the meeting because, the Teams link is closed, whatever that may be. And so, yeah, there's just kind of some things there that can cause people to not maybe feel as included. And like like the title suggests, just feel a little bit awkward. So those are kind of the ones that I've seen over the past several years.
Oh, that's too good. And it's because it's all so true. Like I felt it, everyone in the audience has felt it, which I would love to know, like, the audience, give us some more examples of ways that, like, returning to the office, like, where you have felt this great awkward. And I actually want to say, like, the great awkward is kind of stemmed from, like, the great resignation and the fact that, like, it's now just awkward being in person. But a huge thing that I took from what you said is, like, boundaries, like whether that be a hybrid meeting, shaking someone's hand, all these things, they all revolve around boundaries and having to advocate for yourself in a way that feels like right and feels appropriate. But even that can be really awkward in the workplace. And I know in when Brene speaks about this topic, she brings up the hybrid model. And she obviously has a smaller company. I know, and to your point, each organization is different. But she was like, we're not going to do hybrid meetings. She was like, either everyone's going to be online or everyone's going to be in person. And I mean, again, I don't know if that's applicable to every organization, but to me, that makes so much sense. And to me, that gives employees, team members, the space to set that boundary and say, I have to take my kids to school. I need to work from home. Okay, cool. We'll do a virtual meeting. Or, hey, y'all, like, we want to, like, here's the notice. We want to have lunch. Let's have lunch, have an in-person meeting, and just kind of set those boundaries and roll with it. And so I think when we think about how we need to bridge this great awkward, which I think there's even a question if we even do we need to bridge the great awkward, or can we just embrace the fact that things are changing and roll with it? But that makes me think of another thing you said, is that there's so much inclusion that is necessary. And I know you and I both really value diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And so I've often found, and just like thinking about this podcast and conversations about how applicable the great awkward is that I think a huge reason that's driving how awkward it is a lack of intentional inclusion or community within your workplace. Not even your workplace, just any virtual environment. And so I'd love to know, like, your thoughts, if you think there's any other drivers as to why this awkwardness is just continuing and why we're not really able to step into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that when organizations went fully virtual, it became really difficult to have casual inclusion, I guess. That's going to sit at lunch with somebody or having a sidebar conversation with the person next to you, and feeling a sense of belonging within the workplace. That sort of went away because then when we went, fully virtual back 2 years ago, everything was very scheduled. And then oftentimes whenever we had scheduled, Teams meetings, there is an agenda that needs to be followed and there's initiatives that need to be completed within that time. And so COVID, I think for many organizations, took away those casual moments that you have with people around you that make you feel like you belong in the work community. Now, that's where hybrid has helped a little bit there. Hybrid has brought back in hybrid, and I guess some organizations going back full time, it's brought back those casual moments of inclusion with people, being able to have those sidebar conversations and get to know people on a more personal level without necessarily having a business agenda simultaneously during that time. So I think things could get better there potentially soon with the introduction of hybrid model. And then another driver I think that continues to persist is organizations not laying out consistent guidelines for all employees to follow. Because I know I've seen on like TikTok and social media, some people will be like, okay, today's my day. I'm going to go into the office. I haven't been to the office in a while. Like, we're hybrid now. Like, I'm going to go in. Mm-hmm. And then they'll go in and then nobody else came in that day. Or it's vice versa where, they, like we were talking about earlier, they'll be the only person calling in from home while everybody else is in the office. And so I think that, organizations not kind of having ground rules for everyone to kind of base their weeks off of and plan their weeks around, it can make things a little weird, especially if you're not on the same, going in schedule as people that you'd like to become involved with in the organization. So that's another thing. And then, I mean, this is just kind of a broader, longer term thing that we'll find out more in the years to come. But I think that there's just some trauma associated with living through 2 years of a pandemic, having life flipped upside the head, and having to completely change our lives as we know it in a matter of minutes, in a matter of days. We are all still very social beings, just as humans. But I think that it is difficult for us to re-assimilate into, our old ways of living and our old ways of working. Like, for example, like I come into my office most days, but I will still catch myself, instead of going over to someone's desk to like ask them a question, I'll just send them a Teams message. And I think that's something that's still going to happen. But yeah, I think just like the trauma from being isolated and working in an isolated fashion for so long, it's going to have lasting effects.
Yes, I agree. I mean, and like I said earlier, being in school during the pandemic, I haven't had that work from home experience. And so all of these experiences are just awkward, but I have nothing else to compare it to. Mm-hmm. And so I'm in the same boat of being like, well, I have this question. This person is literally sitting right next to me, but I don't know if I can just walk up to their desk or not. And so I would like send them a message, and it's just awkward in general. But I think that's why we have to embrace the awkward, is because if we don't embrace it, then we're going to limit our learning, and we're going to be able to limit our growth opportunities. Because if I'm not going and building relationships with people or asking questions because I just may not know the etiquette around it, or it just may feel uncomfortable, then that's damaging not only for my personal growth, but for my professional growth. And I think anyone who values growth would probably say it's uncomfortable. If it's comfortable, you're probably not growing all that much. But I think I agree with you in the fact that I think there are going to be long-term negative effects of this. And for some people, working from home they've been doing it for years, and it is totally their thing. But I think for the people who do want it, who crave being in person and having those experiences, and it's just awkward, I think that's where we could see some limitations. Because to your point, like after the meeting, just social conversation of getting to meet people, have maybe just casual questions here or there, but just also like learn about them. I feel like you're missing out. I feel like I have missed out on like networking opportunities, just to like I've like left experience, and then they're like, oh, you should have met this person who is so aligned with like what you want to do. And I'm like, well, I didn't know. And so it's almost like, so you just kind of miss out on just those small moments that really matter. But I agree. I think we're going to see long-term effects, and I'm intrigued to know how developing our careers and growing in our careers is going to look differently now that there's not just one way to succeed or to thrive at work. There's so many ways you can do it. So what do you think like that will look like, and the impact? Like, do you think trying to develop our careers and as young professionals, like, do you think this great awkward mentality or the inconsistency of hybrid is going to hurt or maybe change, or do you think there's positives? Just, I'd love to know like your impact. How is growing in our careers going to change because of this great awkward and just the uncomfortability of this new work environment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think, what this has all introduced is this new way of working. And now that this flexibility has been introduced, this hybrid model that many organizations are using, I think that the younger generation, so Gen Z, millennials, that is going to become an expectation moving forward when folks are looking for jobs. I think that many of the young generation folks are going to want to have that flexibility when they're looking for a company. And so that is going to have to cause organizations to adapt their policies if they want to attract really quality talent. So that's one thing that's going to happen. And then in terms of advancing of careers, I think that folks are just going to have to adapt. They're going to have to figure out different ways to gain cross-functional experience. Say they want to interact with someone in a different department, but that department isn't in office very much. There's going to have to be some additional effort that's put in there in order to gain that experience. And also, I know networking is super important in the business world, and I will be the first to admit it's not one of my strong suits. But like you said, if, say, you're not in the office, but then that person is, there's not that opportunity for those casual moments that you have with them. If you would want to meet that person, you would have to go out of your way to ensure that you are scheduling time with them. And so I think that in terms of career advancement, the younger generation, so us, you and me, we are going to have to work to ensure that we are striking a balance between prioritizing, our lives and making sure that we have our needs met personally through the hybrid model, while also prioritizing our career growth by taking the steps necessary to speak to the right people, get the right experiences, and put ourselves in the most positive light possible from a hybrid standpoint.
Yeah. And I think I agree with everything you say, but I think on top of that, this just shows the complexity of where the workplace is at and I mean, every generation, I think every generation is experiencing different challenges as they enter the workforce. I think it's different for every person and every generation holistically. But I think you describing this, it it is complex and it's very gray. It's not a black or white because each person is going to be different. But for us, we're just so new in our career, and there's still all these things that we need to do, the right people to talk to, the right projects to be on, the right company at the right time, like all these things. It's so complex because, as we spoke earlier, there's still a lot of trauma and people are not okay. And that's something that Brene does talk about in the whole context of this great awkward, is like, people are not okay just because we're exiting out of, just because it appears that we're now exiting out of this pandemic. People still are not okay. Like, people are still experiencing the long-term effects of it and the short-term effects of it. And I think that definitely plays into why things are awkward, because people are not okay. And so my hope at least is that as we continue that a positive that can come from the workplace now being a really awkward and uncomfortable environment in some ways, is that we can open a dialogue of mental health, of vulnerability, of growth, where we get to be like, and just be honest with the people that we are working with. And that goes back to boundaries and the fact that we get to create boundaries that feel safe and good to us in the workforce. But my hope is that this kind of the dialogue continues, even when we may not be in a pandemic 20 years from now, but we can have a dialogue of being like, wow, I'm really not okay. This happened, and now I'm feeling like this. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes. I mean, I think that, like I said, there's going to be long-term effects that we don't know about yet because, the studies haven't come out yet. The science hasn't been done yet. But moving forward, I do think that in the workplace environment, it should be okay to say, hey, I'm not doing so well. Can we talk about this? Or I need to take care of this thing in my life. And I just want to be open about that. The pandemic has caused us to have to be super vulnerable because all kinds of things have happened. People's friends and family members have become ill in some cases, and people have experienced isolation in ways that we have not known before. And since work is such a huge part of our lives, I mean, we spend a ton of time at work per day. It should be okay to have these conversations moving forward and to be open about it, and for organizations simultaneously to do the work to provide their employees with resources. I think that is something that employees are going to come to expect, is access to resources through their employers.
Agreed. And I think there's so many things that leadership in companies can do to bridge the gap between that can bridge the gap between this great awkward and make people feel seen and valued and heard amongst, because there's awkwardness just in even doing your jobs. Like there is social awkwardness, but there's also just awkwardness in trying to execute projects, in not knowing who to contact because we don't have this interpersonal connection because it's awkward. And so to your point, I think there's a huge opportunity for companies to step in and to say, we understand that people are not okay. We understand this is awkward. We understand that we are all relearning how to work and how to operate together as a team. Here are resources, whether that be alignment within a team, to Brené's point, like all hybrid, all virtual, a really consistent game plan, mental health resources, just improved benefits. Like all these things are things that we can do to make us as team members feel valued and feel like we have connection, not only to our company, but to the people that we work with. And I think that's going to be a huge driver to help solve these awkward moments and kind of embrace these moments. Because I think language is so important too, because if we call the fact that this is awkward rather than trying to ignore the fact of being like, if I were to shake your hand right now and we were both like, do we shake hands? Like if we were to like just zoom past it, I feel like that's a missed opportunity, rather than being like, I don't know if I should shake your hand right now. Like, are you comfortable with that? Like, how are you feeling? And I think that just opens a dialogue of vulnerability and inclusion and respect for others. And so I think that gives us an opportunity to kind of switch the dialogue from being like, that switches the dialogue from being like, oh gosh, this is so awkward, to being like, no, we're going to embrace this and we're going to have positive change. And I love what Bayram just said. We need a fearless organization. We need organizations who are going to embrace this awkward, advocate for their team members, and say, we're going to do what we need to do to make sure our people are thriving and doing well. And I think this is an interesting topic because everything's connected, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you don't have inclusion, if you don't have alignment, if you don't have vulnerability, like all these things, if you don't have them, none of them are going to work. They all have to work together.
Right.
But I mean, this topic's just so good.
I mean, you and I have talked about this great awkward episode, this 30-minute episode with Brené Brown's podcast. I think it should be just required listening as part of onboarding.
I agree.
Organization, any level within the organization, any job, like whatever it may be, it needs to be required listening moving forward if companies are going to operate in the hybrid model. And I have shared this with leadership within my own organization, and they have found this insightful as well. So I do believe this can be helpful any level, any organization, anytime. It should be listening.
I agree. And I love that you shared it. So here at Let's Talk Supply Chain, we have a TikTok account. So I'm going to show a quick TikTok that just kind of embraces, I think, like, if you can hear it. Okay, well, the audio is like, hey, how y'all doing? And it's like me walking to the office like after 2 years, because it's so awkward. And no one knows what to do. And I just felt like that was like the perfect embodiment of like what it feels like, because literally we've all been there.
Yeah.
We've literally all been there, and I'm sure our audience can relate. Everyone who's been here, but I wish we had 30 more minutes to talk about it. There's so much more. I really encourage everyone to just embrace the awkward. Thank you to our audience for joining us. And I hope to see y'all next week. But also, Jillian, thank you so much for being a part of our show today and just being able to share your insight. It was so good. But no, I encourage everyone, embrace the awkward, advocate for yourself, do what feels good to you, create boundaries, because those are all necessary in the workplace. And I think we're in a place of starting to change that. But I appreciate y'all so much for being here. Thank you to Ships and Let's Talk Supply Chain. And Jillian, per usual, it is always a joy. So thank you so much again.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. This was a great conversation.